And as we drove away, he told me he was very, very disappointed. He said, why? Well, he believed, I don't know in his reading, he wasn't Orthodox, we read a lot of things. He was thinking about becoming Orthodox, but he thought that monastics could be men who walked about really kind of floated, kind of around the monastery, cowl over their head, heads down, in a constant prayer, just sort of floating. And to go to a monastery where, yes, they pray, yes, they do liturgies, but they milk goats and make soap and have obediences. And it completely blew his image of what it is to be in a monastery. And I got to thinking about that later. I wonder sometimes if I don't over-idealize the Christian life. And it's easy to do in Orthodoxy because, after all, we have so much literature on those who have attained unto perfection. And so we begin to ask ourselves, or we begin to envision what kind of Christian I should be or I ought to be. And we begin sometimes to feel, at least I do, feel a bit sad that things aren't quite turning out as I idealize them to be. Grab something. I thought, after all, I've been a Christian for a long time, and I would have thought in my mind that maybe I had certain visions. I certainly thought that I would be a more joyful person. I'm usually a pretty joyful person, but I have to admit that there are times when things really get to me. Please, come in. There are times when I'm not very joyful. In fact, I remember writing once that a joyless Orthodox Christian is a contradiction in terms. Well, I think that's true, generally speaking. But sometimes I have to be honest that my faith, my priesthood, my life in the faith, I'm a pretty sour person. Not quite the joyous person I imagined that I would be. Certainly I thought I'd be more peaceful, and I think sometimes I'm somewhat peaceful. I have moments when things are very tranquil. But I remember reading about the peace that passes all understanding, and that peace that was the peace that Jesus would give to us. And I think that's true, and yet sometimes my life is in a bit of a turmoil, and things are not very peaceful. I certainly thought after all this time I'd be a more patient man. And yet that image of myself, or what I thought I should be, how patient I should be after all these years, the Lord usually sends something my way that immediately shows that I'm not a very patient person. Just not the person that I thought I would be. I thought I would be a kinder person. Sometimes I'm not very kind. I thought I'd be a more generous person, but sometimes I'm so selfish with with what I have, my time, my finances, the things that God has given me in abundance. I'm pretty selfish about things, sadly. I thought certainly after all this time, especially after all the love that God has given me and all the forgiveness and grace, that I'd be a more faithful person, being a priest now for 15 years and being a Christian for a long time. That I would be a more faithful person, that I would learn how good God is, and how worthy He is of my faithfulness. I certainly thought that after all this time, I would have more self-control. Well, let's skip over that one. So what am I to do? I suppose that I could strive to be more loving, strive to be more joyful, strive to be more peaceful, strive to be kinder, more generous, more faithful, have more self-control. I could strive. And yet I find that truly I'm striving for the wrong thing. Again, I always remember the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, which we all young people hated to read. Pretty boring stuff. But I remember that Franklin thought he would try a course of self-improvement. And so he put down a list of all the virtues he thought he should have. And so he went to work on the first one, and when he attained it, he put a gold star by that one. And then he got the second one, he put a gold star, and then he started working on the third. He had to take the star off the first one because he lost it. And eventually he gave up on the project.